Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the poetry of Marie Annharte Baker, whom I'm reading out of Native Poetry in Canada. So Baker is an Anishinaabe poet from Manitoba. I'm not feeling tremendously bad today, but I'm going to once again sort of just mention I am dealing with a cold. So if I cough or sniffle throughout this video, I apologize in advance. So, Baker's poetry is really cool. She, there I go. She uses a lot of humor, which of course is always fun. Makes for delightful reading. But a lot of the humor is sort of in the service of processing experiences of Indigenous oppression, the difficulties experienced by people in poverty, by women, particularly single mothers, by aging women, etc., etc. So, I mean, there's a lot of trauma and a lot of suffering, a lot of oppression that goes into the inspiration for these poems, but they are dealt with often through humor. And that seems to be aligned very much with the coyote, which is a recurring figure, often a sort of self-personification in Baker's poetry. Her poet personas often identify with the coyote, which in many Indigenous cultures in North America is a sort of trickster figure, a cunning survivor figure. And so in that sense is very sort of appropriate. Image for a poet who uses humor to work through experiences of suffering. Ironically, having just said that, the first poem that I'm going to read for you by Baker is not about coyotes. It's called Moon Bear. And bears tend to be the other sort of big recurring animal that Baker uses, at least in the poems in this collection. But this is very much about these sort of issues of motherhood and the challenges and experiences that go with that, I think. So this is Moon Bear. My moon is a deep lake in mind. Little fishes swim in depths, too scared to see the shaking sunlight spears above their stare. She bears birthing in my winter womb, sleeping till spring to growl again. Shadows dancing before the nights come. Tomorrow the wind message will bring what happened since her earth eyes shut. Muzzle up and around for scents secure. Maybe even a tourist campout is early. Her baby wants her back. It's still cold. The ice face feel of my moon lake slips away as soon as there is more sun. My moon will grow within me to greet rising bears, bringing warm faces to my lips. And so I think this poem is one that's interested in particularly the struggles of single motherhood, because one of the things, according to the introductory bio, one of the things that Baker did for work was she worked as a family worker to prevent the apprehension of Native First Nations children by social services and to defend the rights of Indigenous mothers to keep their children safe. So this is very much a social problem, a cultural concern that Baker experienced on a pragmatic level. And so I think through this, there is the sort of identification between the mother bear and Indigenous mothers, Indigenous women who who seek to, and often struggle to, in the political realities of settler colonialism in Canada and the United States, who want to protect their children, who want to keep their children with them and to maintain their cultures by handing those cultures down to their children. So the bear who awakes and sort of goes out seeking food, goes out seeking sustenance for herself and her children, and who, even as she does that, is missed by the children, right? It says, her baby wants her back, it's still cold. That line, that sort of sense of being torn between needing to provide for one's children as a single mother versus that need to be there to support the children. And this is a thing that this is a sort of thematic that Baker deals with recurringly throughout her poetry, is the difficulty of this tension between providing materially in a world of capitalism and culturally structured impoverishment for Indigenous people versus the need to provide emotional support and to be present in the lives of children. That those two things for people are very often mutually exclusive. So another one where we get this sense is the poem Trapper Mother, which is the next one I'm going to read for you. Looking into the animal den, I saw how carefully she set the trap hidden with pieces of pine branches. Our tracks she kicked away in the snow. I was her helper. She gave me the job of turning the wheel on the egg beater to make milk from clim powder. The meals I made were for the cat. She supervised boiling birds in my toy cookware after I'd plucked them. I wasn't very squeamish. I saw my mother's bloodied hands on a muskrat skin, turning it inside out to fit a stretcher. Her floured hands made a baby pig from the scraps of bannock dough. Her tomato soup was creamy because she used canned milk. The only time I tasted it was after school. I came home knowing she was acting strange. She just wasn't around that much, or she was drunk a lot. In the bush, we had a stove and a table next to the bed. In the city, the room had a double-burner hot plate. I never saw my mother in a kitchen, but I saw her in jail. And so again, there's this central tension between the world that has been constructed for Indigenous women by settler colonialism and capitalism, and the opportunities to provide the kinds of material comfort, cultural sustenance, etc., that people often would wish to, right? The two things become mutually exclusive. The characters in this poem occupied the two competing spaces of the bush and the city, and in each of them, within the larger structure of settler colonialism and capitalism, the ability to actually provide for one's family is limited, right? There is somewhat more opportunity in the bush because the mother in this poem has these traditional trapping skills, sort of abilities to catch food, prepare that food, etc. Whereas in the city, things are coming out of cans. But even then, in the bush, there are limitations to what can be done because, again, settler colonialism and capitalism severely limit these opportunities. There are constraints, for instance, on what can be hunted, how much can be hunted, etc., etc. So all of these things become limitations on how First Nations, Native American, Inuit, and Métis people can provide for their families. The next two that I'm going to read you are both much more humorous. And this is, again, one of the big characteristics of Baker's poetry. She has this great sense of irony and absurdity tied to observations about the world. So this is a poem called Boob Stretch. My breasts when I was 14 were silky soft to the touch from outside my brassiere, loaded with scarves to avoid the falsy feel. Babies know what to do right away, just suck, choosing between vanilla on the right dodos and chocolate on the left dodos. Just have to be plugged in. Someday we will all have the granny tits, eaten out milkers stretched by generations, so long and flat over our shoulders trailing. And so again, this is very much a poem interested in women's experience and the challenges and difficulties of being a woman and providing for one's family. In this case, providing through the physical body, right? The breastfeeding is one of the most sort of foundational and universal ways of feeding a child, providing for that child. But central to that is still that act of providing nourishment, that need to provide for others. And so we have that thematic continuation from the first poems that I had read you through this one, which is, of course, a much funnier take on this issue of how women navigate the need to provide sustenance, food, nourishment, etc. And then the last poem that I'm going to read you from Baker is called Bear Piss Water. And one of Baker's other interests is ecology, according to the introductory material here. And this one is a very much satirical take on the sort of the intersections between environmentalism, ecology, and this whole ethos and indigenous knowledges. And there's actually a really, really big overlap between these two, because many environmentalists turn to indigenous practices in whatever area they are concerned with, whether that's the different regions of North America, different regions of South America, Australian Aboriginal people, Maori in New Zealand, indigenous Polynesians, wherever it is. Environmentalists will often look at the practices of indigenous peoples because those are practices that typically had sustained cultures for hundreds or thousands of years without often, not always, without doing substantial damage to local ecosystems. And so there is a good amount of overlap there. But that's also sometimes exploitative and culturally reductive in really problematic ways. And so this poem, Bear Piss Water, really deals with that issue. Consider going to shaman school. With enough practice on the rattle and drum, I'd be able to back up a poet. A course in chanting would help me solo. Consider dropping out in my first year. A grade point average must be maintained, and all classes need prior approval by a guardian spirit. I got to consider what have I got to lose if I drop out. I still got the nerve it takes to set up shop and practice without a license. Consider bear piss water, not poetry. The potency of natural spring water that a bear made sacred. That water with the mercury and acid rain. You find it just after the turn-off to Sioux Lookout. Just when the craze for natural water was highest, I decided to try an experimental market. Consider this water pistol in my hand, which I filled with a bear piss water sample. A squirt or two and you'll be officially blessed and prepared to listen to my eco-poetics.